So my name is Strehlow from the Thüringen Institute of Baltic Sea Fisheries, and I'm going to be talking about the frequency and the trust of media use of German anglers. And we gave it this little provocative title to also get some people in the room. So just to give you a little bit of a background, this is nothing new to you. Obviously, collecting recreational data is not so easy. There's a lot of challenges around. There's a lack of reliable data. And that's problems especially that I'm running in because we run traditional surveys. They've always been expensive and time consuming, but they're also recently suffering a lot from decreasing participation rates. And we also heard it from our keynote on Monday. There's a big drive towards using smartphones, web applications, trying to get more data out of digital data collection. This little thing here is the new EU rec fishing app that came into that is now in force since 2 months. So we have now a mandatory data collection in Europe, which is not going to work. But anyhow, it's there, and it's an app that I helped developing. And ultimately, it's also, of course, about communicating and reaching out and involving anglers. So the objective was basically to look at different information channels and what are the frequency of use of these different channels. Then looking at how does angler specialization, in our sense it's not complete specialization because it's looking at centrality to lifestyle and avidity and membership in angling associations, and how does this influence media use. Obviously we wanted to look at age because that's always a thing that people think about, and level of education and how does that influence media use, and then the role of all these factors on how they trust these different information channels. And the method was a typical telephone diary survey, so we contacted 150,000 German households by telephone. That's what we need to do in Germany because the participation rate is extremely low. And then we ended up with 1,900 diarists at the end of the day. And we had quarterly follow-up calls where we kind of reminded people to fill in data or retrieve data. But of course, we also use these quarterly follow-up calls to collect all kinds of information. And one of these calls was used then for asking for these different information channels. And we did have predefined information channels that we asked, and then we asked about the trust, and we used our survey weights from the survey to weigh the data. And yeah, that's not so interesting. At the end, we had 1,200 participants, so all these efforts to end up with 1,200 participants for all federal states. They're all male, or most of them, mean age, you know all this. Avidity here, 26 angling days. This is from the screening survey, so it's not from the diary, so it's probably factor 2. So it's much less than in the diary later. And main target species, this is now marine and freshwater, was trout, pike, and pike perch, and centrality scores were intermediate. So getting into the results, this is the frequency of, how is that blurry? Anyhow. So this is the frequency of information channels used, and you can see that we call it personal communication, but it's like face-to-face exchange, basically, was by far the most important to anglers. So this is 74% of the anglers relied on that one. And then social media, which is on the way bottom down here, so X or Facebook, Instagram, was actually rarely or never used by 60%. So the majority of people never use these kind of information channels. And then YouTube, that's of course stuff what Valeria works with a lot, was at least used by 35% of the anglers. And then angling apps had also very low use, 25%. That's interesting for Chris, for example, and also, of course, for our EU setting now. And then radio, TV, and magazines were used by 33% and 61% of the anglers, respectively. So that was frequency of use. Now we move on to trust. So how much do you trust these channels? Obviously, face-to-face communications and magazines. Well, magazines not so much, but face-to-face communication was trustworthy by 74%, or rated trustworthy by 74% of the respondents. Magazines a little less. YouTube also still 35%. Angling apps by 25%, and then social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, again, not at all or not very trustworthy by 60% of the respondents. Then we looked at these all kinds of predictors for use, frequency, and trust of these different information channels. So the centrality, if centrality went up, you could see that the frequency or the use frequency for all media types increased. You could also see that the trust in digital media increased for higher centrality, but it decreased for TV and radio. I'm not sure why that's the case. That's a little funny in a weird sense. For more avid anglers, there was a higher frequency of YouTube use, and the trust for messenger services and YouTube was also higher. If you were a member of an angling association, there was a higher frequency of use of angling magazines, which is probably related that many of these clubs send actually out magazines to their members. And then angler network size, I forgot to mention that in the beginning. We also asked people how big is the network of anglers that they're communicating with, and they could just put in a number. And the bigger the network, the higher the frequency use of apps and messenger service, which is kind of also makes quite a lot of sense. When you were older, frequency of use of traditional media increased. This is a little bit what you would expect, and the frequency and trust in digital media decreased. Also, again, a little bit what you would expect. Education level, that was quite interesting. Was basically negligible, so didn't really have any influence on frequency, use, or trust of these different information channels. I termed this discussion because we didn't really look into the why to find some explanations. So obviously digital media information channels and angling related use was not so high. So there's some surveys out there that say, okay, there's distrust in social media, there's maybe hate speech, and that's why I'm trying to avoid them. From our interpretation, we were thinking probably keeping angling related secrets as one of the predictors, maybe also fear of stricter regulations. That's something we hear a lot, fear of stricter regulations, so they don't even want to post any catches, anything. And then also quite a few people from our experience, they just say, well, I just want to go fishing and not waste my time on the phone or whatever. And then compared to other countries, at least in Europe, digitalization is still quite low in Germany. So in terms of who owns a smartphone, things like that. And what are the consequences for management? Obviously, there's quite a lot of challenges involved for fisheries management if you only focus on social media for your data collection or for your communication or for your involvement in outreach. So that's something where we would just like to raise this as a thing that, as an issue that you at least have to be aware of. We are kind of foreseeing that there will be probably a low compliance with this EU app, at least from a German side. It's different, of course. This would be interesting in terms of doing this in different countries, because I'm sure there's a large cultural influence on this. Obviously, this is nothing new. There's a lot of bias in catch and effort data. Crystal had a nice talk on that one. And we saw that as well, so there's definitely an overrepresentation of avid anglers. And kind of what we see moving forward, you need, first of all, if you wanted to take it into a practical sense, you need well-designed apps with a lot of features to actually lure people in using these apps. If you want to communicate and work on your communication and outreach strategies, it not just has to be tailored to your individual angler groups. That's like a no-brainer. Everybody knows that. But it's also interesting to look at these different information channels and especially the trustworthiness of these channels to have effective communication and outreach. So that's an interesting one I thought I could present here. And then obviously this is also a no-brainer, but at least there's some people have to be reminded that you should always compare your angler app groups with the general population, because there might be quite a big gap between them. And then what I'm particularly interested in is our research on barriers that hinder participation, particularly using digital platforms. And with this, I think, yeah, I thank you for your attention. Thanks. Uh-oh.
5 minutes.
Okay. Way too fast.
I don't know if this would be outside from the work you did, but do you think anglers are really aware that people are using social media for data when they post? Like, is that something they're afraid of, what you were saying, or?
We hear that quite often.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, the most common thing is that they think somebody will have a look, where that was posted, what date, to try to get the same fishing spot and so on. But recently, because we saw a lot of more tighter restrictions coming into place, there's also always a big fear of new and stronger restrictions coming in. Yeah.
First, I'm curious. So when you gave your initial phone surveys, you just asked people, "Are you a fishing household?"
Yeah.
And then they said no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then on your YouTube, did you count podcasts as a way to get information? Was that true? In your YouTube?
Yeah, we didn't have it explicitly mentioned in these predefined information channels, so don't know. You could count, but but I don't really know because we didn't specify it. Yeah.
Did you ask, Harry, great presentation, did you ask them how often they posted on social media? Or did you just ask if they got information, and were you specific on what type of information was it?
Well, we always, all these questions are phrased in a word that it's always angling-related information.
Okay.
So it's not like their general
No, but it could
screening
be
for
about
news or
regulations,
whatever.
Or it could be about deer clothing, or it could, it depends on,
Yeah. So to answer your first question, no.
No?
So I don't know how, pity, yeah. Well, for us, this was also, we want to inform ABMs with this, so anglers, so it was about networks and trustworthiness and these kind of things, but yeah, sorry.
I'll leave now.
No. But then you said something else, and we had actually a follow-up survey where I think we asked that question.
Because there is a tendency,
Not that-
at least in
yeah.
some management, right, that you follow the vocals, right? So if it's only like 5% of the population that's actually posting, and
Yeah.
you think, oh, that represents, the whole population. Of course it doesn't, but these numbers are really interesting, I think.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, you presented your data kind of in aggregate, and I'm wondering, you have a median age of 49 years old. Did you see big differences in age bands in terms of the in-person versus social media? Did you have younger participants where you could tease out, actually they did use it more, they did trust it more? And did you think that there may have been a bias in even answering the phone in those younger age groups? I'm wondering.
Wow, what a question. I don't know. No, this is, I mean, this,
One of this is easy to answer, one of them isn't. I think the bias on the phone is hard to answer.
yeah, the bias on the phone, this is just the bias on the phone. We will never solve that problem.
Were you able to
But the age, I mean, we checked for age. We have ages well covered, but of course there's, the very young people are underrepresented, obviously, for various reasons. But we checked for age as a predictor for media use frequency and for trust, and it had no influence. Well, it had an influence on, I brought it up. Did you see it or not?
Yeah, I did, but I guess I was wondering, if that
There's more in the data.
aggregated in some way where if you actually split apart age groups,
Yeah.
that statistical relationship would change.
Boah, I'd have to look in the data again. But yeah. Given my colleague who's a statistician, I'm sure he did that. And I'm sure he didn't find anything. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Harry.
Yeah, you're welcome.